Perfect. So welcome everybody. This is Shivendra. I'm based out of Delhi, and this is the first of the series of tri-series webinar, which we are kicking off in the Asia Pacific region for IAB Tech Lab. Welcome, Dikshant. So we are kicking this off. So IAB Tech Lab is a global organization, but primarily our presence till date has been based out of US, Europe, and Australia. So we have not had presence as IAB Tech Lab in the Asia Pacific. IAB is a good brand name, well-known brand name. Shelly will be talking about it as we go ahead in the presentation. So this is the first of the 3 seminars which we are trying to introduce everyone to the set of the entire assets, topics, and the regions that we work on. And so the first one is today, the second one is on 17th of December, and the third one is on 21st of January. So please mark these dates. I will repost the links for registration for the next 2 seminars in the chat. So please join this. These 3 seminars will possibly give you an entire overview of the entire IAB Tech Lab story. More so, my appeal to everybody of you is that this is not a training. This is not something that you do out of compulsion, out of company. But these are stuff for professionals in the ad tech industry who want to be at the cutting edge, to understand what's happening in the industry and be part of it. So without much more ado, let me introduce my panel. We have Jordan Mitchell joining us from US and Shelly joining us from US. Jordan is the Senior Vice President at IAB Tech Lab. Shelly is the Vice President Programs, Vice President Products. And Jordan leads our entire global initiative on the privacy, identity, and data, which he will be talking about. So in a few moments, you all know that there are a few events which have already got marked in the near future, and which are kind of making cataclysmic changes in our industry. The third-party cookies are going. There is a whole set of identifiers that are going to vanish. The big players have already announced it. This is all welcome moves because industry needed that. But that's opening up huge question marks as to how do we operate in this new environment. So Jordan would be leading us to that. And also he would be talking about data labels, the data, because this is in continuation of the trust theme that we are talking about today, the privacy, identity, and trust that we as IAB Tech Lab believe we should build for the industry. Shelly would be talking about, first, he would be taking us through the entire introduction or the entire gamut of activities of IAB Tech Lab. And then we have Dikshant from Addressability, who will be rounding off our conversation towards the end as to telling us how his association or his organization's association with IAB Tech Lab has benefited them. So without much more wastage of time, Jordan, your stage. Sorry, Shelly, your stage.
Yeah, that's okay. Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Shivendra, for the introduction. So for the agenda today, like Shivendra said, first I'll go through an introduction to Tech Lab and our portfolio, and then Jordan will take us through the project Rearc and the data transparency standard and our data label initiative. And then we'll hear from one of our members, Dikshant Joshi from Addressability. And then Shivendra will talk about how you can engage in the Asia Pacific region, and any questions that you have. Please feel free to put the questions in the Q&A section of the Zoom meeting, and then we'll pick up questions from there. Thank you. So IAB Tech Lab, we are a community-driven technology standards organization. What I do is, like, first thing, like Shivendra said, that a lot of you are familiar with IAB. So I will start with talking about the how IAB and IAB Tech Lab work together and how we provide the industry with the foundational technology and other artifacts that they need to be successful. So IAB is present in many of the countries. Like you may know that IAB Southeast Asia out of Singapore, or IAB Hong Kong, or IAB Australia, and IAB New Zealand. And then, of course, in China, we have the CA, which is similar to the IAB, and JIA in Japan. So they focus a lot on the market development, which is primarily supporting the sales and marketing functions within the AdTech organizations. And the IAB Tech Lab, which is us, we focus on the technical standards to support the development of products within the AdTech industry. So what IAB does is they will do education and certification, research, work with your organizations for public policy, and provide guidelines and business standards, and also organize the events and networking. What IAB Tech Lab does is we develop the standardized protocols and specifications, softwares and tools. We also have compliance programs so that you can trust when other partners when you work with them. And we also support education and events. So together, we provide you with the product and service development, the operational innovation, packaging and pricing, and then the competition. So that's the part that you develop over the standards and the policies and the best practices that we provide the industry with. So our mission is to engage a community globally to share the cost and share the benefit, and to develop foundational technologies which are member-driven, developed by the members like your organizations, and are made by design, are made available for broad utility and broad availability. And then, of course, all of this helps build trust in the digital media ecosystem. So we do this by way of being a neutral, transparent, open source, nonprofit organization. So we share the cost and share the benefits. We are very member driven. All of our work is developed by members, and all of our work is neutral and transparent and available as an open source. And we are a nonprofit organization, and we focus on the foundational technologies that everybody can use as a baseline to develop into their products. So what are the technical standards? It's what we do is something similar to what USB or Wi-Fi or Bluetooth do for your devices. Easily allow you to connect any device to any other device and operate your devices. And the companies that build those devices can easily build their products on top of these standards. We do something similar, but for digital media. And that helps with scale. It helps reduce the engineering costs and efforts, and allows you to innovate and build on top of these standards with interoperability already available. And then, of course, it increases your speed to market, that you don't have to do point-to-point integrations and work independently with each partner. You can all work together and develop something that works across the ecosystem. So what are the different standards? These are some of the standards that you may be aware of already, like OpenRTB or Open Measurement Sdk, or the WAS standard for video, transparency and consent framework that we've developed with IAB Europe for the GDPR standards, and then ads.txt and sellers.json for ad fraud, MRATE for mobile ads. So this is just a word cloud of some of the standards that we have. And what I have here is this is our full portfolio. We've divided our full portfolio into 4 categories of business challenges that these address. So first is identity, data, and privacy, and we'll deep dive into that later today. And then the second area is brand safety and ad fraud, where we have solutions like ads.txt, sellers.json, and supply chain object and content taxonomy and ad products taxonomy to address brand safety and ad fraud. The third area that we focus on is ad experiences and measurement, which is all about the delivery of the actual ad to the consumers. And where we have standards like VAST for video, MRATE for mobile, new ad portfolio to define the ad specifications, safe frames, a secure ad container, and open measurement SDK for measurement of the campaigns. And the third area is programmatic efficiency, where we have OpenRTB, which is the default for the programmatic transactions, OpenDirect for automation of programmatic guaranteed, and some of the other standards like the new ones that we've released, like CATS and Ad Management API. And besides, we provide guidance on how to address different platforms like CTV and OTT using these standards. So that's a quick snapshot of all our standards portfolio. In terms of our presence, so we work with a global community. We have 750 plus companies who are part of IAB Tech Lab. We have 30 working groups and 2,000 plus people who regularly engage in our work. And like we said, we work with all of the IABs in different regions. There are about 46 of IABs with whom we work closely across all the regions. So we have a global presence. And like Shivain said, we are a global organization. So once, if you join Tech Lab, then you have all of your offices across the globe can participate in our work. This is, we are managed by a board of directors of who's and who of the industry, some big and some small, but they are the leaders in our industry, and they govern our work, and they provide the direction for Tech Lab. Some of the, just want to highlight some of the adoption, some of the work that we've done recently has found like wide adoption and speaks to the testament of our members working together to produce something that everybody wants to use. So ads.txt is one example. It's globally adopted by millions of websites. Another is sellers.json. It was very quickly adopted by the SSPs in the industry. About 150 plus adopted it in less than 6 months last year. And then, of course, we have the Open Measurement SDK. Now we have 80 plus certified integrations of OMSDK. This is just a representative list, and I've kind of highlighted the APAC companies. And we have about, out of those 80, there are more than 20 companies that are from the APAC region that have adopted the Open Measurement SDK. So this was just a highlight of some of the work. Just want to quickly give you a quick flavor of how we are structured and how we work. So like I said, we have our board of directors that oversees all of our groups. And then we, as the Tech Lab team, reports directly to the Tech Lab board. And then we have working groups that are created based on the need of or demand of work being done. And then these are, this is where all of the members come together and define what work needs to be done, define the requirements for that, and define the solutions. Some of the working groups sometimes have a commit group to do the decision making for the working group. They also, help with managing some areas which require a little bit more TLC and require more involvement, especially like software development, like Open Measurement has a commit group where the commit group members manage the roadmap. They also contribute to the development and engineering of Open Measurement SDK. So with that, I will hand it over to Jordan.
Thank you, Shaily. Appreciate it. I'm going to talk about the ongoing identifier challenges that we have globally and our efforts to re-architect around that. Next slide, please. So there are some key takeaways here that all of the systems that we use for the buying and selling of digital advertising rely on third-party identifiers to support key use cases, and those identifiers are being removed, which means we have to re-architect up to 20 years of work for the systems and the processes and how we do things in and around privacy preservation. And this means changing the technical standards and the guidelines and best practices and establishing those for new ways of doing things to support the use cases around targeting and measurement and privacy and optimization, etc. So that also includes accountability compliance program, and IAB Tech Lab is heads down focused on in collaboration with all of our members towards standards to improve all of these things for our industry. Next slide. So we all understand and benefit from an open ecosystem. The web and its technologies were based on open technologies and open standards, which created unbelievable innovation in consumer content, services, and conveniences that we as consumers all benefit from. And we, of course, are part of companies that and third-party vendors oftentimes that are there to support the first-party business models and use cases. And of course, we as consumers get to choose what services that we engage with and what brands and publishers that we rely on and trust. Next slide. Well, the challenges of an open ecosystem with open standards and open data sharing comes a lot of different parties in the delivery of these consumer experiences that we all appreciate. And there's data flowing to a lot of different places at once and being collected by a lot of different parties and shared and used by a lot of different parties. And if you're a publisher or a marketer, you're concerned about your data with your consumer relationship being leaked out to others without your control. And there's also challenges of fragmented user control and transparency. Next slide. The approach of the leading browser operating system platforms, such as from Apple and Google and others, has been, as they move from tracking by default to privacy by default, they're effectively cutting off third-party access to device IDs and breaking a lot of the core business activities and use cases that underpin the operation of buying and selling within our industry. And in doing so, they're fracturing open standards and user experience conventions and making decisions on behalf of the consumer instead of allowing the consumer oftentimes to make those decisions for themselves. And we have concerns about if this continues with all first parties making decisions on behalf of consumers, it's not only confusing consumers across different devices and channels and sites and apps that they use, but it is making it difficult for all of our companies to deliver wonderful consumer experiences. Next slide, please. So our approach has been predictable consumer privacy instead of paternalistic consumer privacy. We need open standards. We need to evolve the open standards so that we can support the innovation on behalf of and for consumers that we all appreciate. It is up to consumers and the first parties that they choose to engage with. So we need standardized signals to capture the consumer's privacy preferences and make sure they're passed all the way through. We need standardized signals for first parties, the publishers and the brands, to establish what is okay with regard to the data that is used or accessed by the vendors that they utilize. And we, as an industry, need to make sure that IDs and personal data is secured from unauthorized or illegal use. And in doing so, with auditability and accountability programs, we can establish supply chain trust, and we absolutely need to establish supply chain trust. Next slide. So, there we go. So participation with the working groups has been very, very strong. We have 37 countries involved, hundreds of companies, hundreds of people across our different working groups, and many different trade organizations globally, including 12 national regional IABs. Next slide. And we've gone through a process across all stakeholders, and we're still in this process. Phase one was to understand the problem, understand the business activities that have dependencies on IDs, and the business impact when you remove those identifiers. And then we're looking now at technology alternatives. How do we create new standards around this? And then what are the minimum standards required that allows for innovation to flourish? Next slide. So the current proposals in place are being actively discussed in addressability centers around the different ID scenarios. We still have some pseudonymous identifiers, cookies, device IDs, IFAs. They're available, but they're diminishing. And they're moving towards completely anonymous, where there's no ID, or on-device types of scenarios like Google's Privacy Sandbox. And then there's also movement towards authenticated experiences where consumers are being asked to log in or provide information about themselves in order to access content in services. All of this is made available with accountability solutions. We need technical mechanisms and processes to make sure that our industry, all participants, is adhering to consumers' privacy preferences. We believe that without accountability, there will be no trust, and without trust, there can be no one-to-one addressability for all of our businesses to operate. Next slide. So let's talk about the addressability solutions first. There's 4 pieces of work coming together to, all of which works together to demonstrate with data and with technical mechanisms, demonstrate accountability and adherence to consumers' rights and their privacy choices. And those 4 areas are privacy frameworks, accountability frameworks and the guidelines and best practices, the rules essentially, the technical mechanisms at the system level that create auditable data structures, and then what testing that we employ on this data, the methods and processes. Next slide, and I'll go through each one of these. So number 1, the global privacy framework. IAB Tech Lab has already been working with IAB Europe with GDPR and IAB US with US regulation around privacy, IAB Canada with Canada privacy legislation. And so we want to build on this work and create a global privacy technical framework, which is essentially making sure that privacy choices are offered to all of us as consumers, whether we're engaged with a marketer or a publisher. And one more click here. And then making sure that those signals are encoded and sent to all parties and standardized so that every party can quickly understand the consumer's privacy choices and adhere to those choices. And if we put this together into a common framework, it makes it very easy for companies to comply across the globe using one set of standards. And we can rapidly evolve those standards as each region evolves its regulation. Next slide. Secondly, an accountability program. We need standards of conduct for what does it mean to be part of a trusted ad ecosystem, where only participants that are in good standing can access and utilize IDs and personal data for any reason. in and around different rules, regional rules, rules around the content being accessed, rules around compliance with the consumer's preferences, etc. And these are more, this is an example of not so much the technology, but our partnership with regional policy organizations and regulatory organizations, and wrapping that up into workflows that can be employed within algorithms. Next slide, please. Number 3 is what technical mechanisms do we allow to pass through the whole system that ascertains supply chain and participant compliance and integrity. Just as financial audits require financial systems where you can trace the transactions through the system, our ecosystem needs to be able to trace the transactions all the way through all these different parties and make sure that they're not tampered with, that they're standardized, and turn into data structures that can be audited with log level proofs that can be centralized. Next, within a testing framework, and one more click here, Shaylee. Within a testing framework, we need to make sure that at the point we as consumers engage with a publisher or a marketer, that we're being offered the right choices and the right transparency and control, that is being recorded correctly and passed to all other participants. And then within each participant, that they're recording that, respecting that, propagating those privacy signals, and that those the use of that data and IDs is being done compliant with all of the rules, that it's secured from illegal or unauthorized use. Next slide, please. So we're busy at work today focusing on this accountability compliance program. This is going to raise the bar for the entire industry and will allow us to go to the browser and operating system platforms and demonstrate that we can be held to a level of trust and compliance with whatever the consumer says. And we can go to the browser OS platforms and say, don't make decisions on behalf of the consumer. Let the consumer make the decision. We've standardized this all. And you yourself, the browser operating system, can test this to make sure that we're being compliant. So we're putting together the schemas, the sampling methodologies, the transaction IDs or the event IDs that we can trace, the interfaces, the codes of conduct, and how the program operates. And this is something you'll see from us early next year, is this accountability program. Next slide. So the accountability is very important to our going forward with addressability solutions. Next slide. The first area of focus for us is how do we make sure that an authenticated consumer, where you or I as a consumer, where we provide information, a consumer provided identifier of some sort, is not misused, that it enables that privacy and accountability across the trusted supply chain. We want to make sure that my trust with a brand as a consumer and a consumer's trust with a publisher can be represented by both and can be connected by both across the supply chain without those third parties being able to misuse that data or use that data on an unauthorized basis, perhaps even have access to that data. We want to ensure responsible use of consumer-provided identifiers. We have to if we're going to have any identifiers. Next slide. There will always be cases where we don't have identifiers. We have that today, where there's no identifier, and we can expect that going forward. So we're working on what to do when there's no third-party identifier. And something that's very important is using the context and the content itself. So the aboutness of the page or the site or the app, along with the context in which that advertisement is viewed by the consumer. And so putting that into a standardized taxonomy and process to allow that to pass from seller to buyer for buyers to be able to buy at scale. We already have the content taxonomy. We already have the RTB, open RTB for the transport mechanism. And we're working with other parties such as Prebid to deploy code as we write this specification. And we'll have privacy, measurement, and brand safety guidance here. Next slide. Additionally, on the audience side, publishers will still have the ability to understand their audiences. And so let's make sure we can allow them to pass audience segments of defined by them, defined by publishers to buyers, and allow buyers to buy at scale. And to also understand how how that audience data, how those audience segments have been defined. And this is where data transparency is so important, and I'll get to that in just a moment. But this leverages our audience taxonomy and our data transparency standards, which already exist and are in market today. Next slide. There's a lot here that we need to solve for. And so what we're also working on is how to communicate and provide guidance across all of these identifiable scenarios. So we're looking for ways to bring this picture together and explain how all of these standards come together to help the industry. And we have more work to do there, but you'll see more from us very early next year on this front. Next slide. So again, this is about re-architecting the systems and processes for privacy preserving addressability. And by addressability, it's targeting and retargeting and understanding the consumer's privacy preferences and respecting those every single time, measurement, etc. And so next, I want to talk about the data transparency standards, because it ties directly into this. And this is about differentiating the sources of audience data and fueling better decision making based on audience segments in the market today. Next slide. Today we have really billions of dollars transacted in and around data segments with almost no transparency into how those segments are created. When you buy, for example, an auto intender, someone who is interested in buying an automobile, you can get that from a lot of different places. And they can be even, and oftentimes they're labeled differently, and the makeup of them is very different as well. And no one knows how the seller of that data segment really arrived at that audience segment and how it was generated. So there's no understanding of how old is this data? Where did it come from? Was it modeled? And to what extent was the data manipulated or expanded? And then what was the criteria used to generate these audience segments? Or was it just more population equals more money, which we know to be the case? So how do we understand how these data segments were created? Next slide. So the solution is this data label. And think of this as like the nutrition label for what you see on the tin at a local market for what the ingredients of something, orange juice or a candy bar, for example. We want to do the same, and we are doing the same for the audience segments in market. Who provided the data segment? What audience segment this label describes and how the segment was constructed, and then where the original data components came from. How were they sourced? And was it one user who was extrapolated to 100,000, or was it 100,000 real users that are in market for an automobile, for example? we've had a tremendous amount of adoption and support for this, because we have a large economic challenge here. Lots of data being traded, lots of quality data, but no way to differentiate the truly quality sources of data with the not so quality sources of data. Next slide. So we released the data transparency standards a little bit more than a year ago, after a 1-year process where 75 companies were involved to define these standards. And the program elements are minimum disclosure requirements for the data providers, anyone who is arriving at data segments, up to 20 fields of information to provide, a standardized taxonomy that standardizes the naming for all of these audience data segments. And this is a required field in the disclosure requirement, getting everyone to label their segments the same way. And a very important compliance program as well, to validate the sellers who meet these requirements, to make sure that the sellers are defining these correctly. And then, of course, datalabel.org, a tool where we can bring all these metadata labels, this metadata, together to allow companies to compare and review. Next slide. The scope here isn't about deciding for you what quality means. A buyer will determine quality in their own way. This is more about establishing a baseline expectation for any seller of data regarding the components that went into this, transparent components of how the data was sourced that can be provided to the buyer, that they can use not only in the buying process, but in the optimization process. This is information that they can feed their machine learning algorithms, for example, and understand the components, these different metadata fields that actually turn into better performance for buyers. Next slide. And this compliance program goes into differentiating the different data providers. It looks at the labels themselves. Are the companies filling out this information accurately and completely in a way that makes sense? Do they have the business process as well? Do they have the people and the processes to effectively process and deliver label information at scale? And the technical capabilities to source the data and to apply those processes technically with rigor every single time. Next slide. These labels, these data labels, will live in two different places. The labels themselves, these nutrition labels, will live within the data marketplaces where data is bought and sold, but also at datalabel.org, where Tech Lab members can look at all of the nutrition labels and compare providers and labels themselves. Next slide. So we've got a lot of adoption, we've got a lot of forward momentum here, and the data providers and marketplaces in your regions can adopt today by going to datalabel.org and completing the registration form and understanding more about the specs. And then if you're interested, looking up the compliance audit program to get your seal of approval for how you are generating your own data labels and differentiating your data above all others. And that was it from me. Over to you, Shaylee, or I think to introduce Dikshant.
Thank you, Jordan.
Yes, Dikshant.
Yeah, well, we wanted to have this section today to kind of introduce one of our members, existing members, and to talk to them about why they, when they joined IAB Tech Lab, and how they worked with us and how they've benefited from being a member. So I welcome Dikshant Joshi, who is the Director of Publisher Development at Bishop. Dikshant, please go ahead and introduce yourself in your own words.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Sherry, for the introduction and IAB Tech Lab for the opportunity. So I'm Dikshan Joshi, and I've been with AdPusher for now almost 5 years. And in that short span of time, I've been part of the sales team, the ad operations team. Last year, I was into product development and management. And this year, I'm back in the market selling what we have. And we started the affiliation with IAB Tech Lab when I was the director for product. And my idea was that IAB itself and IAB Tech Lab, especially, is the pioneer in terms of setting up these standards. And even before we joined IAB Tech Lab, we built our own SSP on the Open RTB standards and going forward with the Open RTB 2.7 and 3.0 standards, ensuring that we are on top of whatever tech is out there. But when we decided to go ahead with IAB Tech Lab, the majority or the primary motivator for us was that as a technology company in this space, we want to be associated uh, with the standards as well as the leading organization in the market, which defines these standards with respect to different things. And at the same time, it also builds a lot of trust in our prospect audience because of the fact that they start seeing us as industry leaders and pioneers in terms of whatever tech we are providing. And one of the key initiatives that I would like to speak about that has really helped us was with respect to ads.txt and sellers.json. And I think when this was launched, I could see that, and we even reached out to a few people in IAB Tech Lab about this, but we could see that buyers like the trade desk had stopped buying inventory, right, from a few players. And even before we got into that, we were already aware that, okay, if we need to improve the performance, we need to be on top of sellers.json initiative and the S-chain initiative, which basically ensured us that the adoption of a initiative like sellers.json was more like an early adopter, not probably like a laggard, because there are still a lot of organizations, and according to IAB Tech Lab, I think it might still take 2021 for the entire industry to be on sellers.json initiative. But as at Pushup, we were already working on it, I think somewhere around Q3, Q4 of 2019 itself. How this resulted in a business delta was with respect to the fact that, say, if a publisher is working with the ad pushup versus probably some other partner who's not implemented, say, an initiative like sellers.json and S-chain, what would happen is that a lot of buyers, the DSPs who had decided that they wouldn't buy in a case there was no S-chain object, they would continue to buy from us. So as a publisher who would start affiliating with us, he would immediately see a delta because Trade Desk would be buying through us all across. But by the way, Trade Desk happens to be the second largest DSP in the world. And if they are not buying, that means there's easily like a 5 to 10% gap that is there. And this not only helped us deliver better yields and results, but also helped us even with respect to the companies who are, say, our competitors in the market, right, who did not have sellers.json. We could have these conversations with our prospects saying that, hey, there's a high chance that uh, your provider isn't providing something like this. We could see it in the sellers.json directory. Given they do not have it, there's a delta uplift. And that really elated publishers, and we were able to not only close more business, but also be positioned as a more like a early adopter in terms of whatever tech IAB Tech Lab is working on. And likewise, just in parallel, we've also started working with respect to, say, Digitrust, one of the initiatives which was there, etc., etc. So being associated with IAB Tech Lab really helps us be on top of these standards and initiatives, which then results in even like a great brand positioning as well as a better business in terms of delivering the yield to the partners that we work with. So I think that's a very quick gist of what I had to say about the our association with IAB Tech Lab and how it helps us. And yeah, over to you guys, Shelly and Shivendra.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Dikshan.
Dikshant. Uh, so thank you, Dikshant, for a very crisply providing what association with IAB Tech Lab can do to us. Most importantly, my call is to all ad tech professionals, that people who are passionate about it, people who want to be in the industry for a long time, want to be at the cutting edge of stuff, uh, creating influence rather than following influence. I think this is the platform that you need to be associated with. Sherry, next slide, yeah. So very briefly, I'm just trying to, this is a kind of a proposed framework that we are working with, moving from left side to the right side. What happens is that we will have working groups, which are the technical working groups. So most important thing with IAB Tech Lab is we ultimately want to create technical working groups which have people of technical product management background and who work together to a targeted solution or to solving a targeted problem. So we will have global core working groups which are at this point of time based out of US geography, and then we will have regional working groups like in Europe and like in Asia Pacific, which will come and work on a particular problem. They will have shared target as to what the solution that they're arriving at, and then there will be a periodic sync of these technical leaders to see what's the movement forward. So the overarching framework can still be owned by the global team, and then the extensions and the customizations of regional stuff would be kind of ported into the global framework. At some point of time, based on independent initiatives, there will be global frameworks that the regional team themselves will start hosting, which are region specific or where we have better talent. And then the rest of the global teams or teams of established geographies will port in their stuff. So it's a journey. At this point of time, the key idea is to start getting these working groups in possible, uh, and then actually get people to collaborate and work on specific problems. Yes, Shelly.
Yeah. Just wanted to add to that, Shivain, that the core working group, which are kind of based out of US right now, because that's where Tech Lab started. But our vision is that to be a truly global organization, that this core working group could be coming from any region. And then every other region becomes a local working group trying to support that effort.
Yes. Shelly, next slide, please. So at this point of time, for Asia Pacific, we are envisioning engagement at 3 levels. So already, all of you are already part of the communication group. Communication group is our first line of contact, where we are reaching out to all professionals, companies, and adding them to our database. You would become recipient of all kinds of communications in terms of any research that we do, in terms of any blogs that we write, or in terms of any events that we hold. So you would be privy to all the activities that we are doing. At times we would call on you, and the communication group becomes the base set of people where we want to increase the next level of engagement. People we are calling engagement groups. The engagement groups are people who have shown more interest, more by invitation and selection. Is a next forum where set of people kind of come together and discuss and debate about issues that can be taken up by IAB Tech Lab to be solved, or what are the imminent problems that we are seeing. So that becomes a place for bubbling up set of stuff that IAB Tech Lab may want to work with. And last is obviously the transition from the engagement groups is to the transition groups, the technical working groups. The technical working groups would call for a lot more commitment. We would call for people to kind of become, we would ask people to become kind of members of IAB Tech Lab. Then you can start contributing to the tech working groups. Tech working group is the place where really the work happens. And as Shelly had said, the technical working groups collaborate with the core working groups. And then at some point of time, that leads to the solution of whatever solution that we are working on. So I'm inviting every one of you to become part of communication working group. And as we start engaging more and more, some of you would start becoming part of our engagement groups. Engagement groups will have a regular periodic set of forums where we would discuss particular issues. And then obviously we will transition to technical working groups. So this is a kind of journey. There's no time frame to this journey. At this point of time, more establishing the presence of IAB Tech Lab at this geography, are trying to reach out, create awareness, and get you all onto the communication working group. Please, if you are interested in becoming part of engagement groups and part of technical working groups, please do write to the membership at Shelly lets the email, and you can also membership at iabtechlab.com. Please do write on to that email. You can start getting in touch with us, and slowly we will work together to solve the problems of this geography. Yes, Shelly, do you have to add anything to that? I'll open things for
No, thank you, Shivin. I think that was pretty comprehensive on how companies can engage with us in the APAC region. This is a new start for us, and we do look forward to getting more engagement and trying to solve region-specific problems, especially in mobile, with the privacy regulations that are coming up in India and Indonesia and Malaysia, and potentially other areas, as well as solve the addressability problem like Jordan had described.
Absolutely,
so I'm
Shelly.
just
So
looking
there
at the,
is a lot of. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. I was just looking at the Q&A. Go on. I'll just go through the Q&A.
Yes. No, sorry, exactly. So we believe as IAB Tech Lab, we are at the right point of inflection in this geography. Indonesia is seeing a lot of activity. So just to give you a perspective, the forums would be based out of entire Asia Pacific. So we will possibly have people from Hong Kong, we'll have people from Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, India. I'm just naming just few of the geographies where people would be able to join in. And then at some point of time, we might have to look at specific country-specific assets, extensions or customizations that we need to build at a country level. But at this point of time, would possibly start with forums that address the overarching problems of the entire area. And yes, timing is a big of problem. So I would do need a feedback on anybody of you on the chat, whether this timing of Friday morning works for us, because we do want people to join in from US, and we do want people to join in from Singapore and Indonesia. So we are trying to span, a 16-18 hour of globe in one sessions. So so after a lot of thought, we have come up with this timing at 10 a.m. Please do give in your comments if Thursday suits you or Friday suits you, or any particular day that you would like us to start holding these regular sessions. And definitely please join the session on the 17th. It's a similar session where we would take you to the next set of topics, and on 21st January. So that's the set of events that we have already programmed. And as and when you are becoming part of communication group, we'll keep you posted.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, I'm just going through the Q&A. So there are about 3 questions. The first one is, do you work with the government regulatory bodies or only with the industry players? I think Jordan, correct me if I'm wrong, like the answer is depending on what work we are doing. We do work with the government and regulatory bodies when required.
Yes, absolutely. So we focus mostly on the technology, but we partner very closely with a lot of the policy organizations, and in many cases are in touch directly with them as inputs into our standard setting process.
Okay.
So, I think to add to the answer is one, IAB Tech Lab is very focused on building technical assets. So therefore, at times when policy frameworks get established, we come into play, but it is not that our technical inputs are not part of the policy making. So it's a give and take both the times, but specifically as Tech Lab, usually the policy bodies decide most of the stuff in terms of broad policies, and the tech lab comes into play post that, trying to create a real asset out of what has been created.
The next question here is, in your opinion, what is stopping the publishers to take advantage of all your work? Jordan, do you want to take a step at that?
Yeah. I think that it's not just publishers, but there are numerous reasons why publishers and brands and third-party vendors simply can't take advantage of all of the work. Is that with every organization, they have limited resources and they have to focus all of their efforts on revenues, controlling costs, and focusing all of their engineering, every amount of their effort on revenues. So we do tend to get more adoption when the standards directly lead to revenues. And it's sometimes while standards are being adopted, and in the first 20 or 25% of the adoption, it doesn't lead directly to revenues, and so it becomes difficult to rationalize the deployment and to take advantage of the work. But then you get some large players who make this a requirement, and then all of a sudden you get more of a groundswell of activity of adoption. And this is just how standards work happens. It takes some forward momentum to really start to gather that snowball effect of adoption.
And just to add to that, and sometimes like publishers, they may not know, but they may be already using a lot of the standards because they are using an ads SDK or a network SDK to do their monetization, which are actually using the standards.
And just to add from
Good
my
point.
side as well, just to add to what Jordan was saying, I think it's more about how the adoption curve works. There are people who are innovators, there are people who are early adopters, and typically that's how it works in the software industry all across, right? You'll have people who will adopt quickly, but for publishers with quicker adoption, there's a risk as well. And they wouldn't really want to risk with innovation. They would want like a very stable thing to come in and give them the best results, which basically means that they wouldn't be able to reap the best out of the innovation because by that time things are moved on. So that's just my opinion that how the overall adoption in the software industry works.
That's an excellent point. Thank you.
And then we have the last question here. The China ecosystem is quite different. How are you integrating with that? So I think I can take that. So we do understand that the China ecosystem is different because of the different regulatory requirements in China. But we work closely, like I mentioned earlier, with the CAA, which is kind of the IAB in China. We regularly share notes with them. We regularly exchange information on what kind of standards are needed. And some of their members are part of the Tech Lab, like RTP Asia, Miaoxin Technologies, the two of the bigger players there. They're both part of IAB Tech Lab and regularly attend our working groups. So we do coordinate with them, but given the regulatory requirements, the same standards don't always apply in China.
Here's a great question, Shaili. All the recent buzz around identity solutions like ID5, LiveRamp, Trade Desk, InfoSum, etc. Are they all compliant with your ID standards? Not yet. We don't have identity standards and addressability and accountability standards just yet. We do have. I think all of those companies, I know LiveRamp and Trade Desk are very closely aligned with us, and we're working very closely with us. ID5 is a member, and I don't know about InfoSum offhand, but most of the large players are working with us to develop those standards, to set that bar and we'll be moving towards to be fully compliant with the standards that they help create for our industry.
I think we are pretty much at time. And I think the last, it's not really a question, it's the answer to Shivin's question about the timing, that Indonesia and Malaysia would prefer Tuesdays or Thursdays because of the Friday prayer timing clash.
Great point. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great point. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. We are pretty much right at time. So thank you everyone for joining today, and we look forward to working with you in future. Please don't hesitate to send an email to membership@iabtechlab.com for any other questions that you may have. And if you have questions about our standards, like specific technical questions, you can always send an email to support@iabtechlab.com. We have a ticketing system. We handle all the standards related questions there. So thank you once again. Have a great day and a good weekend.
Thank you so much.
Everyone.
And please join for the next session on the 17th. It's on Thursday.
All right. And thank you, Dikshant, for joining us.
Thank you, Shelly and Shivendra, for the opportunity. All right.